So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Mitchell. I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the new features of Integration Services 2016. This version hasn't yet been released. We do know a few things about it. Recently, we've gotten a couple of pieces of essentially beta software that will allow us to demo some of these features. So I'm going to walk you through what we do know about it. I'll talk through some of the things that are currently changed, some of the things that we expect to be changed. And then I'll go through for the demos that we can show for the things that are already ready in the current beta. We'll go through those. So by way of agenda, we'll talk first of all, I'll walk you through the new features again that we know about, some of which are baked and some of which are still yet to come. I've got several demos that I'll walk through with you on the things that are ready to go and can be demonstrated in an orderly fashion. And then once we get through there, so none of what we're going over is secret or restricted in any way. So all the software that I'll be demonstrating is fully accessible and fully available for download right now from Microsoft. So if you do want to get started, I'll have those links a little later in the presentation so you can pull those down and start getting started with Integration Services 2016. Looking through the attendee list, I know several of you, but several of you I don't know. So for those who don't know me, my name is Tim Mitchell. I'm an independent BI consultant. I work in the Dallas, Texas area, but I've got clients quite literally from coast to coast. I am a SQL Server MVP. You can follow me. I blog, and my professional website are both at timmitchell.net. And then if you're on Twitter, I'm also on Twitter at Tim_Mitchell. So feel free to follow me there. So just a brief mention of some upcoming things that I've got going on. So if you're in the Dallas area and you're planning to attend SQL Saturday this weekend, or even if you're in the Dallas area and you're not planning to come to SQL Saturday, I'll be doing a full-day presentation called Building Better SSIS Packages. It'll be in the Dallas area. Actually, it's the Microsoft campus over in Irving. The registration is still open. The link is there. I'll be doing the same presentation in Boston 2 weeks after that, so 2 weeks from this coming Friday. So that's in conjunction with the SQL Saturday up in Boston as well. So if you're in the Boston area or if you happen to be coming to Boston for that SQL Saturday, would love to have you. That Boston class is filling up pretty quickly, so if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to go ahead and register as soon as you can. And then for those who are coming to the PASS Summit, I'll be doing that same presentation, kind of a graduated or a little bit longer version of that same presentation at the PASS Summit. That'll be the Monday before the PASS Summit on the 26th, I believe it is, of October. If you're already in the area, apart from SQL Saturday, so if you do the presentation at SQL Saturday, you don't have to register for SQL Saturday. If you're going to do this at the Summit, you do actually have to be registered for the Summit as well. But if you are registered for that, would love to have you for that full day presentation. And if you're looking for some longer content, I've got a 4-day class coming up in the Washington, D.C. area, December 7th through the 10th. I'll be presenting with my friend Andy Leonard, who's also a BI consultant. He and I will be doing that 4-day advanced SSIS class. We do still have space in that class for now, but I would encourage you to go ahead and register. We do have group discounts available on that as well. All right, enough the commercial stuff. Let's talk about integration services. So first I want to breeze through and I'm going to show you the things that we know about that are changing in Integration Services 2016 or in some cases have already changed. All right, so many of you, if you're dealing with the administrative side of integration services, you've probably been bitten by this before. So, or actually we'll talk about the current state of the tools before I jump into that. There are two pieces that you'll need to install moving forward to test this out. So they are installed separately, and this is where it bites you a little bit. If you came up from 2005 and 2008, you know that it was a lot easier to install the database engine and install the BI tools or the BI development tools because it was one package. You would install SQL Server, you check the checkboxes, yes, I want BIDS or Business Intelligence Developer Studio installed. So those who are using 2012, 14, and 16, it's a little bit different because you actually have to install the tool set, the development tool set separately. That's still the case right now. You do need to know that for everything that I'm showing right here, you'll need two different pieces of software installed. You'll need the SQL Server 2016 CTP. The one that I'm using is CTP 2.3. And I believe you'll have to have that 2.3 to do all the integration services pieces. They had an earlier version that I don't think had all the IS pieces in there. More recently, the SQL Server Data Tools was released, and I believe this came out in August. It's the most recent preview is what I'm using here. So this one is intended to have all the BI tools. So when it's fully baked out, it will have all the BI tools. So just like previous versions, integration services, reporting services, analysis services, you'll be able to administer and develop assets for all three of those using SSDT. One word of caution, if you're using the August preview, if you're watching this video later on, this may not be an issue anymore. But if you're using the August preview, it does not have the components for reporting services or analysis services yet. It's only specific to IS or SSIS. So do be aware of that if you want to go out and play with reporting services. Not quite ready yet, but that won't affect us in the discussion of SSIS new features. So if you're an SSIS admin, where you may be responsible for not just developing the packages, but making sure that they get deployed and things like that, this has probably been a pain point for you in the past if you've been using later versions. So we'll take a quick history tour. In 2005 and 2008, if you were deploying packages, you deploy either to the file system, or more commonly, you deploy out to the MSDB database. Deploy a package at a time, and if you needed to delete a package, update a package, add a new package, you'd simply deploy that one package by itself. In 2012, and then carried on to 14, Microsoft implemented a new feature, and it was by design that you could only deploy the entire project at one time if you're storing it in the catalog, in the SSIS catalog. So if I've got a project, if it's got 100 different packages, you would have to deploy all 100 packages, even if only one of those changed. So to some extent, I can understand why Microsoft designed it that way, but the way that most people use integration services and really source control as well, that didn't work very well. I heard a lot of complaints about that. So in 2016, they've changed it back to the old model where you can still deploy the project as an entire unit, or you can go back and deploy package by package individually. That's a big change. It's a very positive change in my opinion, and it'll certainly make incremental changes where if you've got, again with our project with 100 packages, if you've got those, you can push out just a single package and not have to worry about having to retest, having to recertify all those pieces. And for those of you who work in a highly regulated or audited environment, you know what I'm talking about, where if you change, if you've got 100 packages, you redeploy 100, even if only one has changed, there has to be a recertification or an audit process for all 100 packages. So this will be a big plus as well. Now under the covers, and I'll show you this when we get into the demos, the package is still stored at the project level. So you can't go package by package if you look under the covers and see this is the deployed XML for my package. It's still deploying it, or it's still storing it in the database as one big blob or one big line of text, if you will, for the entire project and not for the package itself. But again, that's under the covers. On the surface, you can deploy packages singleton now instead of having to do the whole thing. So a couple of changes on logging. So if you're using the native logging, if you're using catalog logging, there has been a new logging level that's added. It's called runtime lineage. Very little has been written about this. I actually spent a couple of hours trying to dig up some good examples of this and didn't have a lot of success. This piece is not fully working in the current upgrade of the CTP, but its intention is to allow you to set this logging level and track data lineage through a separate lineage library. I look forward to see what Microsoft does with this when it gets fully fleshed out, but do know that you will see a new logging level in there. It's not completely defined yet as to how it will behave, so I look forward to how that will work. What we do know more about, however, is custom logging levels. So logging is one of those things that I spend a lot of time talking about. It's not particularly fun to talk about logging. It's like if you're an architect, you don't spend a lot of time talking about how awesome the foundation of the house is. But logging, like the foundation of a house, is essential to having a stable place where you're going to build everything. So having the right logging strategy is critical. These custom logging levels will go a long way toward that. So logging in 2012 and 2014, if you're using those versions of SSIS, changed significantly because you had the ability, instead of going package by package and saying, for package 1, I want this logging, for package 2, I want this logging, you could have that drop-down list, quite literally just a drop-down list, and say, for this execution of the package, I want to get just basic logging. For that execution, I want to do verbose, where I'm getting everything. It was very, very handy, but the downside is that it wasn't very flexible. So you take what you get, and there wasn't any flexibility in that. Starting in 2016, you will have the ability at the catalog level to define your own custom catalog logging levels, where if I want to get everything on the control flow side, my errors, my warnings, and things like that, plus I want to get row counts, I can define a logging level for that. If all I care about is row counts, I can define a logging level for that. Very flexible, and it is reusable, but more importantly, it's portable. This is because it's storing all those logging levels, it's storing the metadata for those directly in the database. It does give you the ability to pick that up via script and move it from server to server. So OData sources, I don't know if anybody's using the OData source. I think I've had, in all my time in consulting, I can count on one hand the number of conversations that I've had about sourcing OData data from some source. The place where you might use this is a SharePoint list if you're pulling anything from SharePoint, but I've seen realistically very few instances of that. There is a new tool I shouldn't say new, there's a new addition to the default tool set in 2016 where it does include the OData source built into the native install. You could get this in older versions. I know at least in 2014 and I believe in 2012 as well. There was a separate install for the OData source, and you could separately download that from Microsoft and install that on every server and on every development machine that you needed to use it for. In 2016, that's baked right in, so you don't have anything extra to do on that. Version targeting. So when you think about, and if you guys work in the type of environment that I do, I've been consulting for a while now, I'll have clients that will have 2014, 2012, 2008 R2, 2005, and for every version of SSIS that I've had to support, I also have to have that version of BIDS or SSDT on either my physical machine or virtual machine, which means that I have to maintain multiple copies of that. Even if it is on a virtual machine, I have to maintain that media and all that. Starting in 2016, we will have the ability, or we're told that we'll have the ability, to have a version-specific development, where if I'm using SSDT 2015, I can say I'm targeting SQL Server 2012, and it will generate a SQL Server 2012 package. I don't need to maintain a separate SSDT installation for that. That's not yet baked into the current CTP, unfortunately, so we don't yet know all the details of that. In particular, we don't know how far back that will go. Will that go back to 2012? Will it go back even further than that? That's really a big question mark right now. But that is a promised feature in 2016. Haven't seen it yet, but I'm really excited about that one. If for no other reason, I don't have to maintain all those other code bases or all those other installs of Visual Studio and SSDT to have multiple versions available to me. So there is a new security setting or a security role that will make reporting on logging easier. So the SSIS_log reader role is brand new to 2016. Specifically, that will allow us to specify that certain users who are in that role will have the ability to query those logging tables. Previously, they had to actually be granted SSIS admin role, which was a little bit of overkill if all they were doing is accessing the logs and monitoring the logs. This new role will allow them to more easily access the logging information from SSIS. Now, you could, even on older versions in 2012 and 14, you could mimic this by tweaking those settings, but if you're tweaking anything in the SSIS catalog, any update that comes along, any patch or any change from Microsoft would be subject to changing that, because if you're writing custom code and they blow away a table, they do something like that within their update code, you could lose all those security changes. In 2016, it'll be baked right in. And I've actually got a blog post by a friend of mine that I'll point out in the notes that will give you more information about that. All right, this one is an exciting one. If you're like me, you really like focusing on building bullet-resistant and bulletproof SSIS packages. You do have the ability in the data flow to capture an error output. So if you have a truncation error, if you have any sort of a data type error or something like that, you could, instead of simply failing the component, send that output out to an error output captured in a triage table, captured in an output file. The problem with that is that the output identified, it would have the row data that you needed. It didn't identify the column that was suspect. In 2016, they actually do include the column name in there rather than just the column ID, where you can quickly identify without having to circle around and figure out what ID, what column 10 translates to. It will tell you that immediately in that output. All right, so if you're interested in high availability on integration services, starting in 2016, it does support always on. So there are two things that you have to do through here, and I actually don't have a demo for always on, but I'll point you to some resources that will show you through there. When I talk about high availability things, I reach the limits of my knowledge on that fairly quickly because I'm not an HA guy at all. But this is new in 2016, so you can enable the SSIS DB database for always on support. The screenshot that I've got here, it's actually disabled. It's grayed out on my screen here, but you can see that enable always on support is a function of the SSIS catalog now. So if you are already using always on, you can add that to an always on availability group and give that some high availability component. Now, it still won't, if you've got a running package and something happens and the machine has to fail over, the package will still fail because it's got data still flowing through that data flow pipeline. But it does enhance the availability of having that online all the time. All right, enough talk. Let's go through a few demos. So the first thing I want to show you is that error column output. I've got a couple of virtual machines that we're going to jump through here, so bear with me while I jump to the right one. So the first machine that we're working with, this is a 2012 SQL Server and SSIS 2012 installation. 2012 and 2014 were almost identical, so there wouldn't be anything in here in 2012 that wouldn't be in 2014 as well. But this is the old way of error reporting. So I've got three components in a data flow. So I've got a flat file source, I've got a union all output that's capturing my error output information, and then my good rows will go down to my output for my procedures table. So when I run that, I will get some bad data going through, and I've got a data viewer that will show me everything that's coming through. And if I expand this out, the data that we get is, or the metadata that we get, I get error column ID. Well, that doesn't tell me a lot unless I just happen to know which column is column 10. There are ways to extract the column name from the column ID, but it's not easy and it's not natively built in. So we have to kind of jump through some hoops on that. That's been a real sticking point because although I know, and you can see that on our data flow, we've got 23 rows of good data, those 3 rows of bad data that we just saw in the data viewer. So in this case, we do have the data coming across, but the metadata doesn't really tell us enough to know what column it was that was actually broken. 2016 will change that. So let me full screen that for you. So same package that we have here. So pulling in the data from my flat file, bad data to the error output. I'm writing out the good data out to my procedures table. And when we run that, we'll get the same result here. But when I widen this out, now I haven't done anything other than just configuring the error output. I haven't done anything special to include this information. So we still get, interestingly enough, it's the same column name as our 2012 installation. But in this case, we get the full path to the column ID. And it's kind of long because it'll have component name, dot outputs, the name of the output, dot columns, and then the name of the column. In this case, the name of the column is patient ID. We only have one column that was problematic. If we had had, say, data truncated across 2 different columns, we would have had that on a row-by-row basis. It would identify the bad column on a row-by-row basis. So it will only identify the first error that it comes across. So if a column had multiple deficiencies, for example, it's not going to tell you all the columns that were bad. It would just tell you the first one. It would route up on the first error. It's going to route that error row over to this output and then identify the bad column as such. So it's a fairly trivial change, it really is. But this is one of those things that will help you if you're doing debugging, if you're doing troubleshooting. You want to know quickly without having to rerun the package over and over again. You want to know what column was causing the issue. You can easily capture that, and more importantly, you can log this information. So over time, you can say, this particular column has caused me a problem in 30, 40, 50% of my executions. I need to change the data type. I need to improve my error handling so it's properly configured to handle that. So really useful add-on there. Again, it does look fairly small, but it is significant in terms of the impact that it could have on your packages. All right, so let's talk about logging. So a couple of changes on logging. I'm not going to go over the new lineage or runtime lineage log because that's not yet fully baked out in the upgrade version. I will show you how you can use the new customized logging. So if you want to create your own custom logging levels, you can easily do that in integration services. So we don't do that in the package itself. We'll actually do that on the catalog. So I'll jump over to Management Studio. I've got my one SSIS DB catalog. Interestingly enough, I always chuckle when I see this. Catalogs is plural in the object designer, but if I right click on there, it won't let me create another catalog because I've already got a catalog created. So I'm not sure if at some point they plan to support multiple catalogs, but I found that interesting. So if I right click on SSIS DB on my catalog, I get, and to be clear, this is SSIS DB in my integration services catalogs. If I go to my database node, I won't see that same experience because we're not dealing with it at the database level. We're actually going through the SSIS catalog interface. So I'm going to create a customized logging level that'll bring up a whole new interface for us. And as you can see, let me see if I can shorten that up and zoom in on it for you. So we've got a UI that will let us create one or more customized catalog logging levels here. So let's create a couple here just as an example. So I'm going to have one that will show errors only, and I can write this one only reports errors. If I go over to the statistics tab, this is where I shell that out and tell it which, so I tell it which events I want to capture. So if you've ever explored the catalog itself and looked at the logging tables, there are effectively three detail tables in your log. So executable execution statistics, component data volume statistics, basically your row counts, and then the component execution statistics, which will show you the start time and end time on your validation and other operations like that. So in this case, I only care about, because I only care about errors on this one, I'm going to grab executable execution statistics and then go over to events. This may look familiar if you've worked with the event handlers and integration services. So I can specify one or more types of events. In this case, I only want to pay attention to the warnings. So I'm going to grab warning information, close. It's going to ask me if I want to save. Click yes. And let's do one more so we can do a side-by-side comparison. So customize logging level. I'm going to create a new one. This time I only want row count information. And on my statistics, expand that out. So I only want the data volume statistics. I only care about how many rows are being processed through my data flow for each one of the individual components. I don't care about any of the events here because all I'm doing is tracking data volumes. So close, we'll click yes. All right, we're all set. So I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and deploy this whole project. I clicked rebuild instead of deploy. Let's try that. I'll go more into the deployment in just a second whenever we talk about the incremental deployment. So we've now got a project out here. Refresh that list. So we've got a column that we're calling, or a package that we're calling logging. Going to execute that. So this dialog, if you've worked with executing SSIS packages before, this dialog is largely unchanged. But if I go over to the Advanced tab, look under my logging level, you'll see a couple of new items here. First of all, that runtime lineage that I mentioned that's still being developed, as well as select Customize Logging Level. So this is where we'll go in and pick the logging level, the custom logging level that we want to use. So I'm going to do that. Let's start off with executing errors only. So fire that off, click OK. When I execute, just like before, when I execute a catalog package, it's going to ask me, do I want to open the overview report now? I'm going to click yes and just show you briefly. Nothing has changed in here. It's still as useful as it was before. It still doesn't let me select any of this text. I'm trying to grab, copy any of that text, and it still won't let me do that, unfortunately. But it does behave in the same way that it did before. So I'm going to run that again. Execute, same exact process, but in checking my logging level, I'm only going to use row count. Interestingly enough, I don't know that I was going to say I don't know that I tried checking 2 of them, but it looks like it's a single check. So check mark row count only. Click OK. No, I don't care to see the report this time. So now I'm going to run, let me just make that text bigger. I'm going to run a query against my catalog.executions table to see which executions I just fired off. So 23 was the last execution that I used when I was testing prior to the webinar. So we've got 2 different executions, number 25 and number 26. So 25 was errors only, and then 26 was row count only. So if I go through and do a quick replace, so we'll call that 25, 26. Bear with me just a second while I replace that text. So now I'm going to run a couple of queries and show those different executions based on the 2 execution IDs that we just pulled out of there. So grab the executable statistics, and we can see that for execution ID 25, this was the one where we're grabbing errors only. So you'll notice that even though we said errors only and it didn't have an error, it's still logging the start and stop time, just the bare minimum for the package level, for the executable level. It still gives me that level of detail even though I didn't ask for it. So execution component phases returns nothing at all, because for each of those I specified that I didn't want any of the execution component phases. So it did exactly what I told it to do. Execution data statistics, this is where we'll see a difference here again. In the second execution, where we said we only want the row count information, we've only got execution ID 26, not 25, because 25 was that custom level where we said we only wanted the errors. So that's doing exactly what we expected. And then on event messages, or the one that captures any sort of event messaging, you can see that, again, even though we said we only want the error information, we're still getting some operational messages. And really, those are just the warning messages. So the output column, and this is telling me the output column that I sent out to that union all wasn't being subsequently used by a downstream component. So you can see how you can easily craft your own customized logging level. One thing I will point out is that, let me go back to customized logging levels table. So this is going to be a new view that you didn't have in older versions. Customized logging levels will define in the catalog database what those levels are. And if I query that table, we'll see that we have exactly 2. Just like we defined earlier, errors only, that one does have a description, row count only, and you can see it's a bit of a cryptic mask that we have here, but the profile value and the events value signify what level of reporting I'm doing or what level of logging I'm doing. So you can see it stores this information in the database, so that would be fairly easy to port from one machine to another machine. The downside is that if I go back into customized logging level, and I'm going to create, we'll just create X. I want to show you on the scripting side. Ordinarily, in SQL Server, any operation that you can do in the UI, you can also do in script. Unfortunately, this one looks like it grays out the script. It doesn't give us the option to script that out. So I'm hoping that will come in a future version that will let us script that out. But in the meantime, it's simply stored in a database. So it's a bit more work, but you could create your own script if you so choose. So that takes us through the customized logging levels, and you can see how that would work in integration services in 2016. Last thing I want to walk through is the incremental deployment. So let me change VMs. So you'll remember from older versions, and I'll not go full screen on this because I'll be here for just a second. So you'll remember on older versions that if I want to deploy any of this, I have to deploy all of it. I can't do a piecemeal deployment. So if I right-click, just like we did earlier, the second option, or out of the box, the first option that I'll have will be deploy. But if I right-click on any of those packages, I do not have the deploy option in 2012 and 2014 because it's simply not there. It doesn't let me do incremental deployment in those older versions. It does let me do it, however, in 2016. So if I browse out to Management Studio, you can see that I've got 3 packages out here. I'm going to go ahead and delete one of those packages just for fun. Yes, I'm sure. Redeploy. So this is going to redeploy out to the same location that we've currently got it deployed. Whenever we check now, if I refresh, now I've got just 2 packages. The one numbered 03 is now gone. If I go back to Visual Studio, I'm going to add a new SSIS package. We'll name that one 03. 03 incremental. Now, rather than having to redeploy the entire project, right-click, deploy package. It will let me individually deploy that package now. So if I do that, deploy, it's going to walk me through the same UI that we had before. I still set the server name. I still set the path to the package. It will give me a different warning down here, though, because that already does exist. The packages would be deployed to the selected project. Any similar named or same name packages would be overwritten. So it will still prompt me for an overwrite. It won't tell me package by package that you're overwriting this particular package, but it will let me deploy out singleton out there. So we checked to make sure that we had 2 out there. When I click deploy, we'll give that a second and refresh. And now there's our, there's our newly created package that we use through the incremental deployment mode. So very, very handy, especially if you're an SSIS administrator, if you're the person responsible for redeploying code, testing code that's been redeployed. This can be a huge time saver for you. So a couple of things on that. So I can go back into my project if I wanted to delete. Obviously, I can delete the project or delete the package from here. However, if I go to Management Studio, at least in the current CTP, if I want to delete from the catalog, it doesn't give me the option to do that. So if I want to delete a package, just completely remove it from the project, I have to take the long way of going into the project, redeploying the entire project and doing it that way, or I could simply delete the entire project from the catalog and then redeploy the project from Visual Studio. But either way, I'm doing a complete project redeployment if I want to delete a package that's already deployed out to the catalog. So, and one last thing that I'll show you on that incremental deployment is you may have played around with this before. There's a table and a subsequent view called object versions. So the versions that we have out here are still stored at the project level. So remember that we did the initial deployment of the project. I did the redeploy, I did the delete and redeployment, and then deployed the single package. And if and this is kind of getting down to the bowels of things, but if I look at internal, which will actually show me the metadata, the object data stored for that. So if I were to deconstruct this object data, each one of those versions, that's still the entire project. That's not package by package storage. So under the covers, what I suspect it's doing, or what it must be doing, is taking the entire project object data, just like you see here, replacing or injecting into it the new package or the updated package that you piecemeal deploy, and then saving back out to this object or object versions table. So under the covers, it's not changing a lot. It's just changing the method that you use to get it into the table. All right, so those are the stories that we can tell with the current version. A couple of things that I'll follow up on quickly. The release date for the full version, the production version, is still in question. I don't know that it's been publicly or otherwise announced at all by Microsoft. So because it will be branded as 2016, I would suspect it will be sometime next year, but I've been surprised by release dates before, so who knows when that will come out. A few bugs that I want to point out. One of particular, it was particularly troubling that it doesn't do an automatic build if you modify a package. So if you open up a package, you add a data flow, you try to run it in the designer, it will bark at you. In fact, I can show you briefly how that works. So if I go back into my new incremental package, drag across a data flow, and now I'll try to execute it. It's going to give me a message to tell me that the package has been modified since the last build. So for the current build, I have to go through this exercise of going to the debug, or rather the build menu, rebuild the solution, rebuild the project, and then I can run that package. So that's certainly a bug and not a feature. So I wouldn't expect that the final version will behave that way, but it is something you'll want to pay attention to. So another bug, as I mentioned, the runtime lineage is not fully fleshed out yet, so I wouldn't necessarily rely on that yet. I showed you earlier there's no script option. There's no option to script out your custom logging levels. Even though you can do that manually, you can't do it through the UI just yet. One minor thing that I noticed on the data flow visualization, if you're running it within SSDT or Visual Studio, the row count visualization where it shows you the number of rows that are processing, that doesn't work consistently. Sometimes it does, but there were several times that I ran it that greater than 0 rows were loaded to my destination, but it didn't show those labels. So I suspect that that's probably just a bug as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't yet have the previous version selection, so I can still only, for right now, I can still only target SSIS 2016. It's been pointed out by Microsoft that we will have the ability to do multiple versions in the future, but that's not yet baked in. So just a few links in getting started. So here's the link to CTP 2.3. You can download that. That short link will take you to the Microsoft download website. And then the second link will take you straight to SQL Server Data Tools 2015, the beta version or the preview version of that. Those are both available right now. They're freely available, and I believe that at least for SQL Server, I think it's a 180-day trial, so it'll be good for the next 6 months, which hopefully will get us to a release date or something very close to a release date. And then just a few links. So there is a more comprehensive list of all the changes on 2016 with that, the first link that you see there. There's more comprehensive coverage on Always On that we didn't fully cover on the second link. And then a couple of posted all, it looks like I've got the Always On duplicated. Apologies for that. So there is a blog by Jen Underwood. I wanted to point that one out because that's the one that Jen Underwood works for Microsoft. She's in the BI space, and she's quite knowledgeable in those things. She pointed out in the blog post linked at the top that the increment, or rather the version specification would be in some future version. The last link I want to point out, if you're interested in learning more about the database roles, in particular the SSIS log reader role, Juice Van Rossum has got a good post on that with the link down at the bottom. All right, so that's our quick drive-by on integration services new features for 2016. I definitely appreciate you coming. It looks like I've got a couple of questions in the queue. Will that allow a number of rows that flowed through each step? So I think, Peter, that question, if I interpret correctly, that's talking about logging. Yes, it will. So the logging piece will allow you to capture how many, not just how many rows that you processed from source to destination, but if you had 15 different data flow components, it will tell you from component 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and so on, how many rows of data were passed from one to the next to the next. All right, other questions? Any performance improvements? So I haven't noticed any specific performance improvements on 2016. I believe there was a brief mention in one of the blog posts that I linked about some performance, but I think they said the same thing about 2014. I didn't see a huge performance jump there in any of the components either. So I wouldn't expect, at this point, I wouldn't expect that we're going to see a huge performance jump. All right, so it looks like that's all the questions. So I definitely appreciate everybody's attention. Again, if you want to reach out to me, my email's here, my Twitter address is here. All these webinars that I do, I announce on my newsletter as well. So feel free to sign up for my newsletter. It's a spam-free zone, so you hear from me maybe once a week at most. But I will definitely send out messages letting you know what events are coming up, and especially free stuff like this where we can do an online webinar and share with everybody. So with no other questions, I definitely appreciate your time, and I look forward to chatting with you next time.